All right, good afternoon, everybody. The time is 4:01, so I will go ahead and call our Wednesday, April 15th, 2026 meeting of the Capital Area Transportation Authority Board of Directors to order and ask our secretary to please call the roll.
Here.
Here. Here. Here. Here. Here. Here. All right. The next item on our agenda is public comments on agenda items. However, before we move there, I know it's been a little while since we've been had a meeting here, so just a logistical reminder for folks. When you're speaking, you have a microphone in front of you that can be shared. Make sure to flip it on so that folks in the room can hear you, but also so that our friends who might be joining virtually can hear you as well. With that, this first public comment opportunity is the time we set aside during each of our meetings to take comment on any item on our agenda this evening. We ask that you please consider filling out a blue card available at the table to my left to assist our secretary, and that you limit your comments to 3 minutes. We will have a timer to assist you with that. I would normally say I would call folks in the order in which I have received cards in advance, but I have not received any cards in advance. So let me just ask the room, is there anyone who wishes to offer public comment at this first opportunity on agenda items? All right, seeing none, then we will press forward. For chair's comments this evening, I have only one note for folks, which is that our colleague Shannon Draheim had a work conflict this evening and asked to be excused from tonight's meeting. So I would ask if there is a motion to excuse that absence. Moved by Eric. Is there a second? Seconded by Chelsea. All those in favor, please indicate by saying aye. Any opposed, say nay. That motion carries. Shannon's absence is excused, and we will press on with our agenda to our Chief Executive Officer's report. Brad, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and hello, board members and members of the public staff. Good to see all of you safe. I understand we had 46 tornado warnings in Michigan yesterday, so another day in Michigan, and we've got some bad weather rolling in today, but we are operating on schedule and have service out today. It's getting tricky with the water levels going up, but we do this every year. So first thing I would like to bring to your attention is, as a reminder, the Comprehensive Operational Analysis, or the COA, big study as to how we are going to design service in the future. The second round of meetings, which involve the public, are in play. The first meeting was today in East Lansing from 11 to 1. The second meeting will be May 12th at the Foster Community Center, 4 to 6. We are having good participation and good conversations with the public, and we will again bring summaries of those conversations back to you when we have them in the future. Secondly, as I was just speaking to the commissioner about, we forgot to sign off down at the Lansing Center. You will not be returning to the Lansing Center for your board meetings. This will be our last meeting before we return home, and we will be at the 511 South Washington Street building starting next month. Pleasantly, Andrew brought to my attention at staff that the furniture for the boardroom is being delivered on 511, which we thought was kind of cool because the 511 South Washington, there's got to be something in there. Anyway, we will be set up and ready to go. There'll be some bumps here and there, but we want to occupy the space as soon as possible. I should note for you that IT staff is currently occupying the building and have already moved. We've got other staff that will be moving in shortly, and we'll try to figure out how to get the mail appropriately delivered to offices. Speaking of IT, we've got a neat update that I wanted to bring to your attention. Has been on a lot of folks' mind, and that is contactless. We are averaging about $6,000 a week in revenue right now. That's between 12 and 1,300 riders during the week, 800 on Saturdays, over 400 on Sundays. Ticket sales are through phone apps, still most of our common transactions. And we will be having vending machines that will be in public locations, which will be new. to do the card values and the refills and really take this to the next level. And the goal is end of June, beginning of July for that next phase. So I wanted to let you know that is being received and used very well out in the system. Finally, budget, not our budget, the budget that supplies our budget, both at the state and federal level. I have no news for you about the state budget. I'm sure that many of you are engaged in legislative asks and waiting to see how these budget items come out. We are pushing for 330 million for the LBO. I should note for you and ask that you carry the water that our top and frankly only priority, as far as I'm concerned right now, is to keep the LBO as high as possible. With that, there is news in the last week coming out of the federal budget. The initial draft coming out of Washington is that the CIG, or the capital investment grants, which is a large chunk of the FTA budget, is going to be slashed. These are discretionary and competitive grants. I'm particularly interested in the formula grants, which are based on our population and ridership that come into this area each year. What I'm reading, and I'll ask Jim to chime in at some point in the future, the initial read on that budget is they're slightly up from last year. I like that. So we will continue to push with our partners, both at the state and federal level, for reinvestment and greater investment in transit, but it is a tough time right now. That's my report, so.
Thank you, Brad. Questions or comments for Brad on his report? Go ahead, Phil.
So I'm going to ask Jim and Dan to jump in. We budget based on a range. We are certainly spending a lot more money than we had budgeted on fuel. We believe that that is going to be coming down. The projection right now is that it will probably average out in the next year and a half or so. Jim, you want to add on to your insight and how we're managing fuel costs? And then Dan, if you want to give your 2 cents afterwards on fuel.
I mean, my only comment is we're looking at it, we're keeping an eye on it. I just looked at this yesterday. We were well below budget for the year through the end of February. We were averaging for fuel and fluids for the end of February on a monthly basis. For the first 5 months of the year, we were averaging about $210,000 a month. For March, it went up to $294,000. The first few bills in April are even a little bit higher than what we had in March. But year to date, we are well below our budget. But if we keep it where we're at right now, we're going to exceed our budget by the end of the year. Yeah, we're keeping an eye on it, and we are as far as planning for, do we look at, contracts and things like that? We're not there yet, but we are watching it.
Thank you both. Thanks, Phil. Other questions or comments for Brad on his report? Brad, I know you and I have discussed this, but I think the only thing I would add on both the state and federal budget is the way the process is working in both DC and Lansing at this point. There seems to be so little certainty about what is a proposal, where things are going to land or whatnot, that I think it's fair for everyone to maintain a sort of level of concern. But we don't know anything until we know something, which is not until much later in the process in both of those places, unfortunately, right now. So I know staff will keep an eye on it, but I think people can be a little cautious about reading too much into the tea leaves in either location at this point.
One follow-on comment that I'd like to offer the board is you're going to see side pockets of money both at the state and federal level. I am very cautious about one-time money injection right now, especially if the requirement is that we take on the operational cost in our budgets in future years. It'll feel good for a year or two, maybe 3, but then we're going to have to bear the cost of it. And so, enough said.
Stay tuned. All right, last call. Any other questions for Brad on his report? If not, then our proposed consent agenda this evening includes 3 items for the board's consideration. Those are the approval of the minutes of the March 2026 board meeting, the approval of the treasurer's report for February 2026, and a software procurement contract. Does any member of the board desire to have any of these items removed from the consent agenda to our discussion agenda? If not, is there a motion to approve the consent agenda as presented? Moved by Steve, seconded by Jack. All those in favor of approving the consent agenda, please indicate by saying aye. Any opposed, say nay. That motion carries. The consent agenda is approved, which brings us to our discussion agenda. There are no discussion agenda topics this evening, and so we arrive at the meat of this evening's agenda, which is a presentation from our guest, John Kinch, the Executive Director of Michigan Energy Options, regarding a solar feasibility study. Before we invite John up to the podium, I'll ask if Brad has any introductory comments, but I would just like to thank John for being here and the work that he's done on this project, something we've been talking on and off about for several years as it relates to some of our other sustainability and energy initiatives, and his partnership is very appreciated. So Brad, any introductory comments you'd like to make before we hand it over to John?
First, I appreciate Dr. Kinch coming in. I know he is an expert in this field, so thank you for doing this. And I'm going to ask Dustin to do an introduction. I just know that we've had an on and off for a number of reasons over the last 6 months. And so the buildup to this presentation is extraordinary. I can't wait to hear what.
Good afternoon, all. So yes, as a way of kind of advancing CATA's focus on sustainability, we did bring in John here, who is an expert in the solar field, to do an analysis on the CATA properties to see what kind of feasibility we would be looking at for converting to solar, what the investments would be like that, and what would be the reimbursement that we would see with those kind of investments. So I'll ask John to step up to the podium there and give us his presentation. Thank you.
Thanks, Dustin, and welcome again, John. And you may have to click the mic too, John, if it's not on.
Is it on now? Is
Yes,
it okay?
all good now.
Great. And let me just see this goes.
Just huge.
For a second, we make sure that. Okay. Are we okay? Huh. It's not advancing. Oh, here we go. Huh. It's on the green. Point at you or point at. Yeah, I may walk with.
I was gonna say, you've only got one thing now. We'll just do it old school. We'll just tell them to move the slides.
So, well, thanks for having me this afternoon. I want to thank CATA for sending this work to our direction. It's been a lot of fun working with Dustin and Brad. And I live in Grand Haven, Michigan now, but I have spent many, many years in East Lansing. As a Michigan State student, lived in Lansing and rode the buses myself. And as a way of a little bit of background in Michigan energy options, and I'll be quick, we got started as Urban Options, which Mark, of course, knows as well, as does Nathan. And one of our claim to fame is that we are one of the few nonprofits in the country to design, finance, own, and operate a community solar park, which is on the landfill in East Lansing. And couldn't have done that project without Nathan, who was our mayor at the time, as well as Shannon Trahan, who was on the city council. So it's nice to be back here with another entity that has everything to do with the quality of life in this region. I also want to let you know that one of the things we do as a routine business line of our own is work with the Lansing Board of Water and Light, both with on their energy efficiency programs as well as on their solar programs. And just to give you a little bit of idea what a solar feasibility study is, one of our other big clients is the state of Michigan. And we have been working a lot with agencies there, primarily the DNR, about how we can bring solar onto those sites and have it actually work. And it sounds easier than it is actually to accomplish it. Part of it has everything to do with the history of a particular site, how old the wires are, what's going on with the transformers, what's going on with the panel boxes, those kinds of things like that. So when we were approached by CATA to do this work, and you have 4 sites, I was immediately thinking, well, maybe 1 out of the 4 will work, given those kind of constrictions we have with the building roofs, with the sites, with shading, all those kinds of feasibility issues. All 4 sites that we looked at are very good candidates for solar in terms of the technical side of things. I think you can click over to the next one. Yeah, and these are the considerations we go through when we're looking at a potential BTM solar project. BTM means behind the meter. So we're looking at the roof, we're looking at the feasibility of the site, we're wondering about the property status. One of the challenges with doing solar projects is that the ownership of the building. It might be a building that somebody owns, but you're the tenant, so you're not going to likely want to invest on solar. But you guys, of course, you own the buildings that you occupy as well. Incumbent utility is very important. And by incumbent utility, you mean whose service territory are you in? And in the case here in Lansing, we know we're within the Board of Water and Lights, and they have been very solar friendly over the years. Some other utilities, I won't name names, around the state of Michigan can be a little more challenging to work with. There are 84 counties in the state of Michigan and 66 utilities. And each of those 66 utilities have different opinions about solar. We've worked with a lot of them. So, but we're in a good shape here with BWL, just to put that out there. Big consideration around solar these days, especially the large scale projects, is how the community is going to accept or not accept these kinds of projects. And if you're going to have blowback because of it. And our sense here, because these are projects that are going on site and on the roof, that most folks who support CATA would also support projects such as this. And then the big one, and I'll talk mostly about that this afternoon, is does it financially make sense, right? And the other thing I would add to this, by the way, is that you guys have sustainability goals and climate goals and things like that. So it does fit into your larger strategy. Yes, sir. So the essence of what we do in this kind of a project is kind of art and science both, and it's what is known as modeling. So there are programs we work with that allow us to take a snapshot of a building and be able to figure out, based on the building's roof and its orientation and whether there's other buildings shading it or trees, of how good of a candidate it is for solar. And then we take that information and run that against what gets used at that building in terms of the energy consumption at the meter. And where those two come together is what we then put forward as what we think would be ideal amount of solar on the roof. Most times you don't have a building that has a roof large enough to provide all the energy you need that you're consuming on site. And that's kind of the case here with the CATA buildings as well, but you can put a dent into it. And the other thing about solar on the roof that's really important to think about, and this is a conversation I have with chief financial officers all the time, is by generating some of your own power on site, you're hedging against the rate increases in utility bills into the future, because that cost becomes a fixed cost that you know and you're going to be paying that for the next 20 or 30 years. The other thing I want to say, so I don't forget, is that the payback for solar a lot of times makes businesses or even residents question whether or not they're going to be somewhere for the next 10, 15 years and realize that value back. One of the nice things about our institutional customers, governments, authorities, folks like that, is that you're going to be around. You've been around for 20, 30, 40 years. You're going to be around for another 20, 30, 40 years. So you make a good candidate for solar in that regard. Yeah, next one's fine. So let's go to the cost part. Here's the big deal. What you're seeing there is financially modeling. So what we do is we model the feasibility of the solar, how much solar generation we think these sites can handle. And then we look at that amount of energy. We look about what that would cost to buy that energy up front, what the net present value of that would be by doing so. And then when the payback starts, in other words, when that investment comes back to you, and from then you're just making profit on that investment year over year. And as you can see, all these projects do pretty well. They kind of average out a payback at around 10 years out. And that's not without doing a lot of, that's just a simple payback. There's all kinds of calculations that go into a payback. That's not reflected in here. So 10 years is a good payback. It's pretty fast. And the return on the investment piece of it obviously is one that is critical to think about. And again, we get back to this idea of how much of your energy do you want to be responsible for creating yourselves? How much do you want to just pay a monthly bill for? And the return on the investment for some of these projects here is really quite good. Another good thing you can do if you decide to move forward with developing a project or projects yourself is you can gang these up. One of the things we did for the state of Michigan DNR, if you've been to the southwest part of the state, I think I told you I live in Grand Haven, go to Holland State Park, for example, and others, you'll see solar panels on the roofs of these, and you'll see EV charging and things like this. We don't actually build any of that. We are really the kind of the think part of it. And then the work goes out and RFPs goes to solar contractors. They compete, competitive bid, they build it. But what's nice about the DNR projects is we took one state park and ganged it up with another and a fish hatchery and so on and so forth until we had a large number of projects, all the same contractor, all the same equipment, all the same procurement. So you get the scalability of a project. So you could conceivably look at these 4 sites that you have and decide to go whole hog and do them all at once, and you'd have some benefits of having scale in terms of your procurement and it's just one RFP and so on and so forth. So this is looking at what goes into essentially kind of the pro forma for a project. And this is taking a look at the transit center in particularly. And the most important line there is the one that I've underlined. And that's kind of what we call, in the business, $3. You probably heard $3 right here and there. One of the challenges with some of the solar work that has happened over the years is that, and I've been doing this job 15 years, early on, there were a lot of grants and free money incentives to do projects, and they kind of came and went. Politics has a lot to do with everything these days. Some of the grants that were here just a few months ago are gone. I know this personally. But what does exist is something called the direct pay credit. And what is cool about that is that investment tax credit has existed for a long time for commercial operations. So if you're a .com, you can get 30% of a tax break on your project that offsets your tax appetite. This is what this is. This direct pay or elective pay is for the rest of us, the nonprofits, the tax exempt entities out there. And what this allows for you to do is on a project, and this one is an example of actually getting 30% of that project cost back to you from the federal government as a check. So it's real money. So one of the reasons to consider moving forward on a project of CATA sites is because there's a timeline on this elective pay. And I'll say something more about that in a second. We can go to the next slide, please. One more is fine. So here's what you think about. So and I know you guys are in the capital improvement business. You understand SIP, you understand what it takes. So I'm not going to go into this, but you're looking at all these kinds of things. You're looking at the net present value of it. You're trying to figure out how much of your utility bill you want to offset. You're thinking of all these kinds of things that go into what you decide are the calculations that you want to put into doing something or not doing something. What we haven't come across yet in this equation is what the price of carbon is. That's coming. I think we're going to have probably a carbon tax someday in the next 10 years, we might guess. So you have all those kinds of things, and that's all adds up to whether you're going to own and operate it yourself. In other words, you make that capital investment, like you're mentioning the buses, and you own and operate them. You're going to do the operation and maintenance on them. You're going to do all that kind of thing like that. Eventually, 14 years later, they've run their course. You've gotten your investment out of them, and you retire. In the solar business, wind too, but let's talk about solar for the most part. There's something called the power purchase agreement. And that is with a third-party solar developer in which you actually are not owning and operating those arrays on your roof, but you're purchasing that power from that company that owns those arrays on your roof. So they're kind of like the utility, but kind of not. So one of the nice things about, I think we'll go to the next slide if there's one more. Oh, yeah, that's fine. One of the nice things about a power purchase agreement is, like it suggests, it's not a capital expenditure. So think of it like Netflix, right? If you own stock in Netflix, you've got an investment in that company doing well. If you have a subscription like I do and you like to watch streaming once in a while, that's nice. You don't have any investment in it, but you get the pleasure or the services of Netflix coming to your home. So a power purchase agreement is something very similar to that. You get the energy, the clean energy, the renewable energy, you get all that, but you don't have that financial risk that you have by investing in yourself. Now, also, people make the argument that you also don't have the payback you would have if you own and operate it because it's a subscription and you're never going to make that money back up. That's just money you're spending somewhere for a service, right? You're not going to ever get that money coming back to you as an investment. Like I said, these other ones have a payback of about 10 years, and then that return and that investment starts kicking in for your financials. The elective pay, one of the things we're doing with Michigan Saves, which is a green loan lending organization here in Lansing and works across the state, is we're helping out nonprofit tax exempt entities to decide if they want to go forward with an elective pay, direct pay approach to a project. We can provide through a grant our services to help you make a decision whether or not the elective pay route is the way you want to go or not. So we're happy to offer that to you. There is a time frame to all this. It's kind of complicated, but essentially by July 4th, 2026, if you don't have a project going, I think there's might be one more slide to that. By then, and don't have 5% spent on hard costs, then you're going to have to get that project. Then you have till 2028 to get the project done. But if you end up falling behind that July 4th deadline, you have an earlier delivery date of early 2027. Frankly, for behind the meter rooftop projects such as this, all kinds of solar developers are out there that can do these kinds of projects kind of quickly. So meeting that deadline of July 4th isn't necessarily the highest priority for it. So what I would say, I think we're done now. Is there one more slide there? It's just my name. Yeah. So what I want to say is when people think about solar, one of the things that oftentimes they don't think enough about, I think, is like, why are you doing this? It's meeting your climate goals. There's an ITC or a direct pay available right now. We've got a windfall of cash sitting around. We got to do something with and spend it by now. So you have all these kinds of things that go into your decision making. We want to offset 100% of our energy. You know, some of these companies, we've worked with Fortune 500 companies, some of them out of Grand Rapids, that have very global climate goals for themselves, and they need to be pretty much, off the grid. Others might just say, I'd like a 20% hedge against my utility bill going up for the next 25 years. So you need to, as a body, can come to those kinds of goals, set those goals, and don't have 20, you have 4, 5. And then that helps them make a decision whether you move forward on a project like this. And I'd be more than happy when you come to that phase of this to just, lean in and help you out, help you think your way through this. Many institutions around the state and certainly around the country are going more and more towards getting some kind of on-site solar, whether it's through a PPA or owning and operating themselves. And the reason is very simple. Our utilities in the state of Michigan go to the Michigan Public Service Commission, the investor-owned utilities, and they ask for rate hikes about every other Wednesday, as far as I can tell, right? And so your rates are going to go up. And, and if you're managing your operating expenses as an entity and you're going to know you're going to be in business the next 20, 30 years, you can count on your rates going up 5-6% per annum, year over year over year. Something like this is a hedge against that, where you've got a known cost, you fixed it, you own and operate it if you decide to do that way, or you have through a PPA. And to me, it just really shows a lot of fiscal responsibility. And also, as I said, if you've got climate goals as well, or clean energy goals, carbon goals, it fits into that as well. So with that, I will shut up and ask any kind of questions you might have about.
Thanks,
this
John.
work.
Let's start with questions. Go ahead, Steve.
When you're talking about PPA,
Mhm.
could you give a comparison as to what the billing rate would be compared to what typically
Yeah,
for water and light
yeah.
charge that we're paying?
Yeah. So, I mean, PPAs they're kind of all over the place, but I mean, I'll just give you a kind of my take on it, what you should be looking for in a power purchase agreement if you're approached by a developer. They should be able to beat the house. In other words, if you're paying 15 cents a kilowatt hour for your electricity now, they should be able to get into 15 cents a kilowatt hour and maybe a little less from the outset. Okay. They're probably going to have an escalator on it, which means they're going to raise your rate a little bit year over year. So your 15 cents is up 2% the next year and up 2% the next year. That's okay, because your utility is going to be raising your rate 5%, 6%, 7%. But you don't want to get into a situation with the PPAs for it to be flatlined and all of a sudden you go up 20% in year 10, something like that. You want to be careful about that. So what you really want to look for is they can beat the house, that you've got an agreement that's a 20, 25-year agreement. Oftentimes, what they will do at that point is turn that asset over to the client because they've kind of realized all the financial benefits they can from it. At this point, solar panels keep producing energy forever. We haven't even gotten anywhere near like the end of them. They go 20, 30, 40 years. They'll still produce energy. So you can then have that yourself. But look at the price point to begin with, look at the terms and conditions, and make sure that if they're going to have an escalator on it, that it's not all of a sudden going faster and higher than what you're going to be paying to your utility. Because the last thing you want to do is be in a 20-year contract and find out you're paying more for that energy.
Other questions? Eric and then Mark.
For your modeling, were you including energy storage like batteries in that system, or was it just?
Yeah, no, we didn't do batteries in it, and we did though add a little bit into the mix, thinking about future electrification. So as we all know, the movement is towards getting things electrical, and that includes your heating, right, through air source heat pumps. That includes our vehicles, EV charging, all those kinds of things like that. So we put a little bit of extra into our modeling, assuming that's going to be the case. But I'll be honest with you that some of the EV charging, for example, that's a large load that requires to run tier 2 EV chargers, and you really can't run those in any kind of consequence from the solar you have on your roof. You really need more solar. That's where some of the utility scale stuff comes into being. We're oftentimes asked if we support, what kind of solar we support. And I say all the above, the utility scale, the large scale, the on-site, behind the meter, the commercial, the residential, the solar on brownfields, the parking lots. We need to have it all going like that. But it doesn't include batteries. That's certainly something to think about, especially if you're thinking about load shifting. And I think PWL has time of use rates now. So you're going to think about things like that, where you can modulate internally. So you're not paying that 15 cents a kilowatt hour all of a sudden on a hot afternoon in August is 40 cents a kilowatt hour. We can work that into it, but I thought we'd just be, pretty straightforward with it right here.
Go ahead, Mark.
I think the board water and lights rate shifting is on the order of like 1/10 of a cent or something per kilowatt hour. So it's more symbolic than it is. It's not
consumers.
Yeah, I look at my bill and I think, geez, 8 cents last month. So obviously this system will produce a lot more energy during peak of the day and on a good day, and nothing at all most of the rest of the time. But you show like for Trantor covering 70 or so % of the energy needs. So obviously you were swapping with board water and light on time, right? How does, I mean,
Yeah. What we're modeling here is not the sunshine in California. We're modeling based upon weather patterns in this very particular part of Michigan even. So it's very specific to the area where we are. Okay. So that's one piece of the modeling. So it's getting down to that kind of granular detail. We had all your utility bills, those buildings. And we're looking at not just the consumption pattern, but we call the profile. In other words, the consumption pattern might be, here's your monthly consumption of, 10,000 kilowatt hours a month. But what we're looking at a day-to-day kind of patterns, where you're up, where you're down, what's going on and things like that. We're also looking in this case to make sure that load is relatively consistent 7 days a week. In other words, one of the challenges you run into with solar with the net metering and what is called inflow outflow policies now is you might have it on a building in which that building is empty on a weekend. You've got a bunch of solar on the roof and it's cranking away, and all of a sudden you're dumping electrons onto the grid. You may or may not have that agreement with that utility to buy that energy from you. They may not want to buy it because of all kinds of reasons. And so you're overproducing energy that you've paid for in hard costs of panels, inverters, and all the rest, but you're not really realizing it. So we've also modeled this based upon usage. One of the nice things about something like CATA is you guys are busy all the time. And so these buildings have a lot of use. So some of the profile mark that we showed you there is based really kind of on why it's doing so well there, because that's a building that's being used quite a bit. And we can offset it.
but my question is really, so this assumes that we have a deal with Board of Water and Light.
Oh,
which must be-
interconnection.
Yeah.
Well,
That-
Board of
that's
Water
not-
and Light has,
That we're selling them electrons, as you'd call it, and we're buying them back other times. Or we're trading or something.
well, what I would say is that Board of Water and Light's interconnection policies for customers, and they have rate classes, everything from resident to commercial 1, 2, and 3 up through industrial. I think the rate book for consumers is 50 rate classes, maybe 100 rate classes. Is kind of zooey, but they have different internet policies for all that. But essentially what the name of the game with interconnection, whether it's commercial like this, like a project such as this would fall into commercial categories, is obviously one, we'd have a conversation with folks at BWL sooner than later if you're thinking about doing this. One of the things that people used to think would be a good way to get a project done would be to spring it on the utility last minute. Not so much. You want to get the engineers and get the conversation going there with them earlier than later. But the other piece about this is you want to make sure that their policies and what we're proposing line up. So we've been through all their policies, interconnection agreements. We're pretty confident what we're providing here lines up. But what that reminds me, and thank you for doing that, is that a good second move here, as well as kind of deciding what your goals are for something like this, and maybe to play around a little bit with the idea of what you want to do, would be that there are good reputable solar companies around the state, even in this particular region, that will give you a pretty good scope of work estimate on a particular site. When they get, and they'll get into the detail more than we will. This is what I would consider kind of a coarse medium sieve. They'll get into a fine sieve, and they'll be able to really tell you that this policy, we fit into Board of Water and Light's policy, or this isn't going to fit. You have to modify this way. One of the ways the batteries are becoming so popular in solar projects these days is because people are keeping it behind the meter. So instead of having it go to the utility who may not want to buy it from you, you dump it into a battery, store it up, use it later on that night or the next day, or when, if it's a gray day, out like that. So what I would recommend is, and I can help you on this, is probably getting some solar company interested in a project, get them out here, get them looking at a building, have them do some of the calculations, and you'll have some of the details. I think that would assure you that you're making the right move. And one of the things that Michigan Energy Options does as a nonprofit is I describe us as de-risking and de-costing projects, because we're not going to build it. We're not going to own it. We're really looking out for the interests of the owner's reps or the client. But also, frankly, most clients we have, even very sophisticated clients, are not solar experts themselves. They're making furniture, or they're putting state parks together. And so we can think like the developer. We know what the developers think, but we're not there to make a buck on the project. We're there to make sure that the project happens. So de-risking and de-costing it is an important step. And I want to, again, thank Brad and Dustin and everybody for hiring us to do this because we think it's really a responsible step for a public institution to have us as an intermediary.
Go ahead, Phil.
Well, let's think of it this way. So, solar can only produce about half of the time, right? Because the other half of the time we have night. So we're already down to 50%. Radiation, solar radiation, sunny days, St. Petersburg, Florida, and Arizona, and places like that have greater efficiency of solar panels than we have here. So some of those states and some of those places have panels that are rated at efficiency at 25%. I've even seen 30%. We're at about 15, 18% across this is not daily, this is across the year, right? Thinking about our gray winter we just got over. And I was thinking that I was driving over here, it's pouring rain. Always my luck when I'm coming to talk to people about solar is that it's pouring rain out or snowing, right? So we're about 15, 18%. And that's the other thing to suggest to you, by the way, in getting into like the PPAs. What that solar company estimates the efficiency of the unit to produce needs to be looked at. Because if they're saying it's going to be a 20% production of a unit, I'd like to see their math because that's pretty high. We're more like 15, 16%, but it's improving. The panels are improving their technology. They're bifacial. They do all kinds of other things they didn't used to do. So we're probably, if you did the math, 70% of what you'd get in Arizona, probably about right. Yeah, I don't mean to be too much of a sidebar here, but we're running a project called Second Life Solar, which we are intercepting solar waste from the landfills. Because unfortunately right now, where does old solar waste go? Goes into the landfills in Michigan because we don't have the strongest of policies and things like that. So what we're doing is we're rescuing this stuff from the landfill and either making it into the recycling streams in Michigan or we're reusing it. Solar panels are pretty durable and they have a long lifespan of being productive. So a project such as this or a project such as utility scale projects, generally they have these projects at 20 years. Those panels probably have another 20 years of power left in them. They have about a 0.5% degradation year over year. So something that's 20, 30 years old is now hitting at 92%. So they're still very functioning. Inverters, some of that equipment needs to be replaced to be sure. But it's pretty durable and pretty long lasting. And one of the other things that's happening in the business is that something called repowering, in which utility scale projects where they had state of the art panel 10 years ago was a 340 watt panel. Today it's a 600 watt panel. So they're pulling these panels off of these projects, putting 600 watt panels on there. And now those panels are loose. And so our Second Life Solar project, by the way, is capturing those reusable panels and directing them to social impact projects. We've got a farmers market in Grand Rapids, for example, that's got a bunch of free panels from us because we kept them out of the landfill. So they're durable. They last pretty well. And the technology is just getting better. I never thought I'd say this, but I could see us seeing a 1,000 watt panel, a kilowatt, like within the next few years.
Thanks, Phil. Other questions for John?
Where'd that come from?
From Ed over here on the right.
You know, I should, but I'll look in here. Let me see. I'll look at my bag. If I don't have one, I'll make sure that I can get a hold of it. Yeah,
If not, we'll make sure you get his contact information.
Yeah, and I think the presentation should come your way. And again, please ask me any questions anytime. We'd love to help.
Steve, go ahead.
I'm intrigued by the idea of recycling panels. Is that feasible on a scale that we're looking at for the 4 building study? Or are we talking about you can't get that many panels?
Oh, you're saying reusable panels for?
Yeah,
No, we could
salvage panels.
we could get our hands on panels enough to do something like this. I think one of the challenges, and we're working our way through this with our lawyers and others in the industry, the certifications, warranties, some of those kinds of things. We work with a national organization, CA, that has kind of figured out a lot of this kind of thing like that. One of the challenges of solar is, you know, kind of ownership. And so even if I had a bunch of solar panels on my house and the company owned them, and I sold my house, that warranty might not still hold. So we have to work out those kinds of things. But we're going to see not yet in Michigan, because we're only at about 1 gigawatt of solar in this state. And the expectation is in the next 10 years to be at 18, 16 gigawatts. And solar waste starts showing up about a 10-year lag. So we're going to start seeing stuff hit the marketplace, you know, relatively soon, because those early solar projects, including stuff that Urban Options was doing, and including what I was talking to Nathan about, the East Lansing Community Solar Park, is 7-8 years old already. We're going to see those starting to show up in the next few years, and you want to find a home for them that isn't a landfill.
Other questions? All right. Thank you very much, John.
Hey, thanks.
Appreciate it. Yeah.
Yeah, everybody. Appreciate it.
All right. Then there'll be some more internal conversations here, and we'll bring this back to the board when staff has had some time to work on it as well. But wanted to make sure that at this initial stage, the board had a preliminary presentation from John. So again, thank you, John. All right. That brings us then to old business. There is no noticed old business to come before the board this evening. Likewise with new business. So we arrive at our second and final public comment opportunity, which is the time we set aside during each of these meetings to hear comments from the public on any matter related to CATA. Same general parameters apply as I mentioned before. Consider filling out a blue card. Limit your comments to 3 minutes. I have had none submitted in advance, so let me just ask the room. Is there anyone who wishes to offer public comment at the second and final opportunity on any subject related to CATA? Seeing none, if there's no further business to come before the authority, then we are adjourned at 4:48 p.m. Thanks, everybody.